Before we get into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our videos. Don't you get it, Lomback? The fat, decadent apes, they've left their flank exposed. An unsecured wormhole in their Proxima Centauri system is all that stands between us and a glorious victory.
The Zamuz brave spoke with a fire in his bellies, like a millenarian preacher. His voice bounced off the steel walls of the chamber and rumbled all it touched. The air, displaced by his gesticulations, audibly whooped like a flashing blade. But most baleful of all was his face. It was a mug that contorted and snarled with giddy delight at the thought of the total subjugation of humanity. He did not kneel before the Jokshuan officer he now addressed. Instead, he paced before him. His tail followed him like a warship's wake. A star race resembling dragons of Terran myth, albeit without the wings or flaming breath, the Zamuz were a bellicose people, the scourge of the Milky Way galaxy. Battle was their way of life, as natural to them as respiration and as familiar as death itself. Whereas other star races concerned themselves with paltry treaties and agreements, the Zamuz regarded all others as either foes or vassals. They did not seek friendship or fulfillment in the company of Xenos, only warm bodies to fight against or with. The warm body he sought the audience of was a Jokshuan fellow. Theirs was a more reserved kind, cautious, deliberate, and deeply materialistic. They were reptilian like the Zamuz, but less bestial. They were smaller, less muscular, less scary. They appraised the world coldly with round eyes and pointy ears. This Jokshuan in particular was a pirate, sure, but a viable military commander in Mancha's eyes nonetheless. Unfortunately, the freebooter seemed unconvinced by the worm's vigorous invective. Turning his back on the Zamuz brave, Lomback clasped his hands behind his back and peered out of the window into the void before him.
Mancha, is it?
He rasped before clearing his throat.
We found your fleet hobbling along like a lame hatchling. In my outfit's territory, no less. Why would we leave you be, let alone link arms with you as allies? You forget yourself.
Mancha narrowed his eyes, unnerved by the lack of vision of his Xeno counterpart. Choosing his words carefully, he cooled his jets and spoke with deliberate measure.
Cut your teeth on the human hordes, and you will slake even your deepest desires. Technology, wealth, splendid baubles, all ripe for the taking. Surely, venerable Commander Lomback, you wish to partake in our righteous plunder? Your kind are the only ones who have ever stabilized a wormhole, used it to travel, and lived to tell the tale.
He shook an illuminated datapad, which was covered in sensor readings annotated in messy handwriting.
Look at this. There is no permanent UTS presence here, since their docking facilities are so small. Just a local defense force they use to intercept smugglers and drunk star pilots.
Lomback flinched, inhaling sharply and turning around. His face betrayed indignance. Without taking his eyes off of Mancha, he gestured toward the attendants in his office.
Men, leave us be, please,
Lomback ordered. Only once his underlings had filed out did he resume his conversation with the Zamuz brave.
Mancha, never again refer to me as Commander. Am I understood?
Mancha folded his arms, scoffing.
What? Did I not go high enough up the chain?
Lomback only returned Mancha's comment with an iron gaze.
No, it is I with whom you must speak. But to call me Commander is to call upon a title I have lost all rightful claim to.
He doffed his cap, one identical to the one Jokshuan commanders wore, but with the insignia covered with blank fabric. It crumpled in his fists.
After the humans defeated us, The Jokshuan High Council called our fleet back, like all the others. Only I defied their orders and mounted one last attack on the holdings of man.
Mancha leaned forward, intrigued.
And?
The action described so grimly by the pirate seemed almost anodyne to the Zamuz brave. Such a last-ditch assault could never be looked upon poorly by any Zamuz worth their horns. Last stands and suicide attacks were a well-cherished fixture of their martial tradition. Lombak cringed, clamping his eyes shut.
We were decimated. We are not even half of our original numbers.
He opened his eyes again, letting them fill with rage.
We are marked men, Mancha. We were not merely declared dead, but erased. Every record of our existence has been expunged. Epitaphs have been etched clear with chisels. Databases have been scoured.
He sharpened his glare into a fine point and pierced Mancha's swagger with cold words.
I know the ways of your kind, gormless lizard. We have battled before. I know that the wage of dishonor is death in the Zamuz culture. For us, truly it is worse. It is unexistence. It is erasure. Huh! No temporal hands can erode true glory,
Mancha guffawed.
Even if the whole galaxy endeavored toward it, no claw or paw can dampen the smile that victory puts on the faces of the revered ancestors.
Lombak appeared weary now, as if fatigued by the indomitable zeal of Mancha and his ilk. Indeed, he remembered when he was tasked with interrogating a Zamuz operative. The pain only invigorated the captive. His resolve contorted and hardened, but never broke. He gave up his ghost before he gave up even a single piece of intel. Right now, he wished he could do even a fraction to Mancha what he did to that operative. His fingers twitched at the thought.
Hopeless! All of you, hopeless. The humans will defeat you too, and you will roam the stars as exiles, as we do.
He beheld the detestable Mancha in his peripheral vision, as if to relegate him to some lesser station.
You are no better than the humans, believing your ancestors are anything more than inert matter now. Inefficient.
Ordinarily, Mancha would have gored someone on the spot for such blasphemy. Indeed, it took every bone in his body to keep his claws sheathed. But the Jokshuans would never be of any help to him if they were antagonized, even if righteously so. Instead, he muttered quietly,
And yet, here you are.
Lombak shot him a glance.
Excuse me?
Mancha met his eyes, returning the annoyance with manic persistence. His claws came out, though did not rend Lombak, merely adding to the emphasis of his gestures.
Perhaps I was too quiet. Here you are! Here on this forsaken ship, licking your wounds and feeling sorry for yourself.
He shoved the Jokshuan for emphasis, continuing,
What is the matter with you? Have you no shame? No honor?
The brave waited for an answer, but upon receiving only silence, he continued,
If you cannot find your spine as you are, then you must be changed. I will transmogrify you into something worth your biomass.
He stretched out his hand and cupped Lombak's stubby snout. Squeezing tightly, he growled,
You and your fleet shall be Zamuz. You will embody us. You will learn from us. You will channel our warrior spirit.
The pirate lord Lombak winced, half expecting to morph into a Zamuz or something. But no, he remained the same sorry sack he was, Jokshuan as the day he hatched. He rolled his eyes at the Xeno's theatrical display. However, deep down, his cool aloofness had dissolved away. The brave's words shook him to his core, and put his post-erasure life into perspective. He had not done anything to redeem himself. Hell, he did everything but. He and his fleet raided whatever shipping he could, be it Jokshuan, Zamuz, human, what have you. To date, he condemned hundreds to death and thousands to slavery. And for what? Money he could not spend in civilized space? Criminal bona fides worth less than nothing to the people he once served humbly? Something snapped. Not Lomback himself, but something inside the pirate. It stirred in his hard heart, welled up and seeped out. Nothing real in the Jokshuan sense. It was intangible, immeasurable, but it felt as real as anything in the hard world of material things. Lomback batted Mancha's hand away, stealing his nerves again.
Mancha, listen to me, and listen to me well.
The Jokshuan spoke with thinly veiled contempt.
We are not friends. We are not allies. Our sword is yours for one raid only. There will be no affection in our hearts for you or your ilk after this. Whatever helps you roost at night,
Mancha said with a sinister sneer.
One raid is better than none. Now, let's talk strategy.
Though it was the closest system to Sol, Proxima Centauri was a sort of backwater, especially by galactic standards. To speak metaphorically, Earth was a glittering megalopolis, with the solar system as its wider metropolitan area and surrounding suburbs. The Proxima Centauri system, on the other hand, was the podunk country one had to drive through to get there. It was home to a single settled planet, Vulcanus, named after the apocryphal Terran stories of an intermercurial planet orbiting the Sun. Just outside of Proxima Centauri's gravity well, a swirling maelstrom sat dormant. It was the primordial vestiges of a wormhole. According to official documentation, every object that had been cast into it by human scientists violently disintegrated upon impact. To date, nothing but charged particles and garbled transmissions had ever been recorded to have exited it. The consensus among the scientists of United Terran Confederacy at large tended to be that the wormhole was one way, though the locals of Proxima Centauri disagreed vehemently. Even the most skeptical and hard-nosed among Vulcanus' research faculty whispered in hushed tones of ghosties who traveled into and out of the vestigial wormhole. Some say they saw them as phantasmal readings on sensor readouts, others that they had seen entities traverse the tear in space-time with their own eyes. It was, of course, these ghosties that were invoked first when the proximity alarms blared across the Proxima Centauri system. These were what the readings were referred to as by the local defense forces. Then, inevitably, the news leaked. Proxima Centauri's system net was almost singularly focused on reports and speculations about the ghosties entering the system. Were they angels? Demons? Monsters? Once the pictures leaked too, the theories gave way to horror.
Impossible! There's no way in hell! Zamuz and Jokshuan liveries? This has to be some sort of sick prank!
Shouted Admiral Wesley Galway, the commandant of the local Proximan Republican Defense Forces. He spat out his coffee before returning to poring over the reports on his desk.
We aren't even at war with the Jokshuans anymore!
His vice commandant, Mehmet Chang, was equally frantic.
What do we do? There's no way we can hold them, sir. They are going to wipe out the entire Defense Force fleet in hours. We don't stand a chance. All we can do is buy time for UTS to get here.
Admiral Galway sighed. Like many other Republican Defense Force officers in the United Terran Confederacy, he had a bit of a complex when it came to calling in the heavies. But now was no time for rivalries.
Just as we were wrapping things up for local New Year's, too. We cannot retreat, but we cannot face them head-on,
Chang murmured. He picked up the phone on Admiral Galway's desk, hesitating for a moment before punching in some numbers from memory. Galway raised his eyebrow.
Hold on, who are you calling?
Holding the phone in one hand, Chang sifted through a filing cabinet before removing a hefty report.
I have an idea. It's a long shot, but you'll have to trust me, Wesley.
He pointed to a table in the report.
I'm calling up Professor Anadir down at Volcanus Polytechnic. If we can destabilize the wormhole, we can cut off the alien supply routes out of the system. It won't kill them immediately, but they'll have to resupply eventually, right?
Chang, you poor naive soul, Admiral Galway said, burying his face into his hands.
I don't know about the Jokshuans, but I've fought the Zamuz. If there is a settled planet nearby, they will never be out of supply. They will ransack every last piece of materiel and crumb of food, and then some. They will eat pets, melt down park benches for projectiles. I've seen it. It isn't pretty.
Then what are we to do? Mehmet asked. Admiral Galway produced a pistol from his holster and laid it on his desk.
Simple. We melt down those park benches first.
He turned his attention to the reports, leafing through them briefly.
Page the professor on the encrypted channels and get an answer. We can't spare more than a dozen interdictors destabilizing the wormhole. We need to keep the rest hidden.
Mehmet Chang seemed taken aback by this line of reasoning, scrunching up his face in astonishment.
What good are they if they are hidden? We need them to close to Volcanus so that we can trigger an ablation cascade to shield the planet,
Admiral Galway explained.
In layman's terms, we need to shred our local satellites to make orbiting and landing as difficult as possible.
And now Chang's jaw dropped.
You want to trigger Kessler syndrome on purpose? Are you insane? That is tantamount to planetary economic suicide. We won't be able to get anything on or off world for decades, if we're lucky. Scorched earth, Mehmet. Today, we are not ensuring Proxima Centauri's trade routes and supply lines are safe. We are making sure there is still a Proxima Centauri that humans can call home next week. I'll page the professor.
Less brave men would have had to draw straws. Thankfully, those within the Proximan Republican Defense Forces were among the most fiercely loyal and patriotic in the entirety of the United Terran Confederacy, especially for a core system, who tended to have a reputation of possessing an indolence of the heart. Some attributed it to their heritage. Indeed, the provinces on Earth and Mars from which the Proximans could trace their colonial lineage were pillars of interplanetary unity in their sovereign days. Others attributed it to the lifestyle the Proximans had cultivated, one of immense discipline in both academic and martial affairs. But every Proximan knew the real answer. Proxy, a portmanteau of Proxima and Moxie. It was a concept invoked to the point of cliché, and entailed a kind of bravado peculiar to the system's inhabitants. It could be shouted before attempting a feat of athleticism, or beginning a standardized test, or storming an enemy trench during a war, all with equal measures of sincerity. Phrases like it were common in human pre-galactic history, though found little contemporary parallel.
Proxy! Proxy! 10,000 cheers for the second sons of the sun!
The PRDF pilots bellowed this chant many times, heaving their service pistols and batons in the air. Their cries echoed across the hangar of the Interceptor's launch loop. There were more volunteers to destabilize the wormhole than needed for the mission. After some deliberation, those in the hangar decided on seniority as their means of selection. The volunteers took no photos, made no speeches. There was simply no time. They entered their interceptors with no further fanfare, were launched in quick succession, and disappeared over the horizon as the rest of the PRDF prepared to dig in for the defense of their system. Vice Commandant Chang's voice came in clearly through the interceptor's comm systems.
Squadron, this is base. Come in, Squadron. Report.
At the head of the squadron was flight leader Graham Thresh. He was a grizzled UTS veteran like Admiral Galway, albeit one whose ambitions led him to seek active service in the PRDF rather than officership.
"We read you, Chang,"
he responded, keeping his eyes peeled for interloping vessels.
"All right. The Polytechnics down planet side have put together a modification package for your interceptors. We're beaming it up now. You should be receiving it shortly,"
Mehmet Chang explained, reading an explanation hastily jotted down onto a legal pad by some undergrad.
"It's going to modify your tractor beams and active dazzlers to work in Concord. Oh, for fuck's sake! Concert! Damnable illiterate!"
He crumpled up the offending note into a ball and shot it into a nearby bin.
"Anyways, just don't use your tractor beams or dazzlers until you get within arming range of the wormhole."
"Copy," Thresh grunted, punching buttons on his console to allow the modification packages to make the requisite changes. In lieu of his dazzlers, he armed his rotary cannon, and the other pilots in the formation did the same.
"What's our routing look like?" "Approach from the upper oblique relative to the plane of their picket line. It gives you the least weapon arc coverage from the Jokshuan ships,"
Vice Commandant Chang instructed.
"I cannot speak for the Zumu's weapons package. The reports on those are still classified. There's no way we can pull them in time." "Understood. Shame that,"
Thresh reported. A warning light appeared on his dashboard, and he investigated the alert.
"We're picking up non-standard weapons packages on the Jokshuan ships,"
he relayed somewhat redundantly as Mehmet received the same alerts in real time. Mehmet pulled up a wireframe model of the Jokshuan ship and cross-referenced it with the ships present.
It seems like many of their armaments have been either refitted or removed. Not just non-standard, but jury-rigged. They have less guns, but we don't know if that means less firepower."
His fingers lingered on the comms systems button, and he hesitated before speaking again.
"Maintain your current bearing. Let's not play it too fancy for now."
"Copy," Thresh affirmed.
"We're getting close to the enemy's formation. Requesting comms blackout." "Affirmative. Godspeed, pilot. Base over and out."
With that, the line fell silent, leaving only communications between the 12 interceptors. In singular file, the combined fleets of the Zamuz and Jokshuans emerged through the once intraversible wormhole. The research facilities that once crowded it were blown out of the ether, leaving a wake of twisted metal and depressurized personnel. They encountered no resistance and headed toward the orbit of Proxima Centauri's third planet to regroup. Lombak peered out from the bridge of his command vessel, an old carrier whose hangar bay was home to equal parts treasure hoard and interceptor starcraft. The planetary bombers that were once attached to the carrier had long since been cannibalized for their parts. Supplies were also centrally stored and hoarded in the carrier, so as to make mutinies less desirable. The ship's persona, an artificial intelligence similar to the genius loci used by UTS fleets, appeared before Lombak in holographic form via projectors in the ceiling and bulkhead.
"Lord Lombak, proximity alert. There are 12 human carriers en route to our position."
The persona replied impassionately. The holographic visage, unsurprisingly, looked like a Joksuan. Its mouth moved as it spoke, but the sounds came from speakers rather than the projected entity.
"Shall we engage them?"
it asked. The blue of its holographic body was occasionally bathed in red by the proximity alarm's light.
"No! Let them get close,"
Lombak instructed.
"Human interceptors go for far too much to let them go to waste. Prepare the tractor beams for interdiction protocols."
"Affirmative,"
the persona said, shimmering slightly as power was redirected toward processing the command and calculating the probability of its success. Lombak let his gaze linger out of the bridge for a few more moments before issuing another command.
"Oh, and while you're at it, Open a communications channel to Mancha and the Zamuz fleet,
Lombak commanded. The persona complied, and a video feed opened of the Zamuz and the members of his own bridge. Mancha took the initiative and spoke before his Joxuan counterpart could open his mouth.
Lombak, why haven't your weapons locked onto the human interceptors? We can see them. They are still in their silos. We are going to attempt to seize their vessels using our tractor beams,
Lombak explained.
Mancha, I know you said they have no serious defenses in this system, but I have my doubts. It's too perfect. It stinks of a trap. There's no way a Terran core world would only have interceptors to respond to military threats. We're going to conserve as much of our ammunition as possible.
Mancha chuffed.
Pah! Stingy curs! Have it your way! We Zamuz will do no such thing. For the bastard spawn of the blue marble, no quarter can be afforded.
Lombak ended the call and sighed. Did the Zamuz always have to be so intense? It gave him heartburn. He addressed the command vessel's persona again.
Make sure you run diagnostics on the shield generators. We don't need a repeat of the Battle of Trappist. The last thing I want is uncalibrated resonators, in case Mancha's intel is bad.
As it very well may be,
Persona quipped. Lombak raised his brow, taken aback by the artificial intelligence's snark.
I beg your pardon?
the hack you authorized on the Zamuz battle fleet was successful. We were able to pull Mancha's combat records.
The persona answered, returning to emotionless indignance. Lombak seemed surprised.
Well, do tell, then. What has our Zamuz friend gotten up to over the length of his career?
The specifics are largely unimportant. Typical Zamuz inefficiency. Gigabytes upon gigabytes of reports of useless combat reports, awards and honors. Their insistence on saving models of their medals and war trophies as high-resolution files will never cease to perplex me.
The persona displayed one such medal in the palm of his projected hand. This tanked the fidelity of his own projection and caused the computers responsible to whir with strain.
So duplicative,
Lombak shuddered.
Indeed. But after analyzing these reports, we've collated a psych profile. It models his behavior with 87.32% efficacy.
The persona dispelled the medal, and he ceased shimmering and lagging.
87.32%? That isn't even close to acceptable,
Lombak scoffed. The persona dipped its head in deference.
Forgive me, my lord, but these profiles never model Xeno intelligence very well. 87.32% is near certain given the circumstances.
I see,
Lombak murmured with steepled hands.
Well, give me the gist of it.
Even adjusted for Zamuz psychology, Mancha tests very high on metrics measuring aggression and impulsivity. He is a formidable fighter, but he cannot be trusted to make strategic decisions in the event of wider fleet action.
How did he come to command a Zamuz fleet in the first place?
The Zamuz do not promote meritocratically. His superiors were taken in by his combat record, and he married into the noble caste after the humans retook the planet Vargas from Zuma's occupation. It was only a matter of time before he assumed command of his own fleet.
Lombak had heard stories about the brutal Vargas campaign in passing. Part of him was grateful the humans defeated his people before they could experience anything on par with the atrocities committed on Vargan soil, but he did not dare speak such thoughts aloud.
I see. Then, what do you advise?
Feign widespread weapons malfunctions in the case of fleet action, and limit fire rate. If the tide turns against us, we must fire on the Zamuz and enter the wormhole as hastily as possible.
Lombak's expression hardened, and he felt his heart stain. Years ago, he would have thought nothing of such advice. It was standard procedure. All personnel were secondary to the preservation of the Joxuan High Council, and all foreign personnel were tertiary. But what was once anodyne now gave him pause. Could he really act with such dishonor twice? He still believed the Zamuz' obsession with glory and the revered ancestors to be foolish, but for a moment he considered how his own ancestors would feel if they knew the depths of his perfidy. Would they weep, or would they be indifferent, being just as complicit in the furthering of the High Council's interests as he was? Lomback turned to the persona and narrowed his eyes.
No.
The persona shimmered slightly, nearly imperceptibly.
I beg your pardon?
I am under no obligation to heed your advice, machine.
Lomback enunciated that lost word with a toxic maleficence.
We are already outlaws, erased. Any report you forward to the High Council will be ignored with prejudice. There is nowhere left to run. There are no ambitions left to fulfill.
He gazed upon a wireframe display of Vulcanus wistfully.
I do not know how to proceed, or what comes next, but we will not fire upon an ally.
Before the persona could speak, he turned the holograph off, leaving only the din of the bridge's many interfaces and personnel.
Abominable construct,
Lomback muttered. A junior officer in the carrier's bridge interrupted the disgraced commander's rumination.
Lord Lomback, the human interceptors have changed course. They are no longer heading towards our ships, he exclaimed. They've charted a trajectory towards the wormhole.
Are you certain?
Lomback asked, sitting attentively.
Those fools, they won't be able to traverse it. We've already unstabilized it. What are they trying to do?
I'm not sure, my lord, but they are outside the range of our tractor beams. Should we fire on them?
Lomback gave the matter some thought. Then he grinned.
Negative. Scramble interceptors. Shoot to kill. If we cannot have the human technology, no one can.
Flight Leader Thresh and his formation of interceptor starcraft had, by this point, passed the combined Xeno invasion fleet. The only sound to be heard in the craft was the hum of their substellar ion drives, which carried them across the vacuum of space effortlessly. Such efficiency was simply not possible with the chemical rockets of old, though these were no longer in living memory. An automated message appeared before Thresh, illuminating his control surfaces. Arming wormhole destabilization package. Stand by for particle bombardment. The human squinted at the wormhole, which was now well within sight. It was closed again, and nothing entered or left the tear in space-time. After having been silent for hours now, the comms system crackled to life, and Mehmet Chang spoke to the star pilots from his office on Vulcanus.
Men, you are coming up on the wormhole now. Listen to me very closely. Utilize your tractor beams first, and then direct your dazzlers into the wormhole at my say-so. Thresh, I've synced fire control to your vessel. Copy. Activating the tractor beams now.
Thresh reported, executing the command to do so. In sync, the wormhole was bathed in strange radiation and stripped of the gas swirling around it. The lights flickered in the interceptors. Just as the tractor beam sweep was about to conclude, one of the interceptors was blown to pieces. Then another. Thresh relinquished fire control, and the remaining PRDF starcraft scattered. One of the other pilots yelled over the comms,
Shit! Thresh! We're undergunned!
Thresh kept his cool, pulling away from the formation briefly. He ejected the irradiated gas behind him to scramble the missile guidance systems of the Joxuan interceptors, which worked. The rockets detonated within the cloud.
We ain't looking to dogfight. Men, break off into groups of 3. Remember our dynamic tractor training. We're going to pull them apart. Switch to semi-autonomous flight. Subroutine 14-T.
PRDF interceptors could not outspeed the Joxuan ones, but they could turn on a dime. So they let the Joxuan interceptors that evaded their rotary cannons get ahead of them. Once they were between 3 human starcraft, they turned on their tractor beams simultaneously. The tactic would usually slowly pull the targeted vessel apart, as well as creating overlapping resonance that shook the target too much for the shield generators or other frequency-dependent mechanisms to work. However, as Thresh and Co.'s tractor beams had been modified for the mission, the targeted vessels were ripped apart into glittering radioactive fragments. After taking heavy losses, the PRDF interceptor formation managed to repel the Joxuan pirates, routing the hostile starcraft.
Chang, we've had to use the tractor beams to fight a Joxuan attack.
Thresh reported gruffly.
Chang, come in. I read.
Chang was clutching his head and frantically communicating with the Polytechnics to come up with a solution in real time.
Damn it, Thresh. We won't be able to destabilize the wormhole. Chang, on your honor, tell me what is going on.
Thresh took a stern tone that snapped Chang out of his frantic behavior.
Well, I suppose the cat's out of the bag,
Chang said with resignation.
The truth is, we've always been able to traverse the wormhole. We, as in the UTS at least. The Joxuans actually figured out wormhole travel by stealing our tech.
Thresh was speechless. The scandal was not lost on him. He had been lied to, and his patriotism, his proxy, was exploited to ends that were deliberately hidden from him. He felt betrayed. With barely hidden anger, he spoke.
What are we really here to do? The tractor beams are to reconfigure the endpoint to a wormhole in UTS rich space. The Dazzlers are to signal them,
Chang explained. He wasted no breath. There was no reason to.
According to our readings, there should be just enough charge in your interceptors to run the tractor beams for the remaining time, and to send off a few minutes of Dazzler signals. How do you intend for us to get back to base?
Thresh asked.
We run the weapon suite off the same power as the ion drive. We're going to strand ourselves here if we do that. Was that always the plan? If our plan works, you will not have to worry. If it doesn't, you will also not have to worry. I'm sorry, Thresh. Chang over and out.
Thresh beat his fist on the comms panel, screaming with each impact. He took a few moments to collect himself again, before pinging the other interceptors.
All right, men. Who's alive? Sound off.
He got 7 responses.
Good. Initiating weapon control sync. Get in formation and fly toward the wormhole. Resuming tractor beam activation in 3, 2...
Captain Jedediah Tigander, commanding officer of the UTS Pembroke, squinted at the readings. Neither he nor the vessel's science staff could believe it. The wormhole in the far-off Farallon system opened, and the weak light of Proxima Centauri streamed through the tear in space-time. "What did the transmission say again?" Tigander asked the scientists. "SOS, maximum security threat. All hands, joint Jacinto Zebra threat." Tigander's eyes widened. Jacinto was UTS code for Joxuan, Zebra for Zamuz. His fleet was combat-ready, but the galaxy had never before experienced the horror of a joint Joxuan-Zamuz attack. But he was at ease. The Pembroke and the rest of UTS Battle Group Leon were among the most well-decorated in Earth's history. They were not invincible. No military in history has ever been. But their name inspired fear in the enemies of Terra. "Are we going to outfit in the wormhole?" Captain Tigander asked his science staff. "As is standard procedure, we'll go in single file. Every ship will fit, except the Pembroke. Its comms mast is just barely too tall. It'll scrape against the sides of the wormhole." "That's no problem. Detach it temporarily. We can't use shields inside of or shortly outside of the wormhole anyways, so I'm not worried about ruining the ship's shield-shaped signature." The science staff thought to themselves, trying to find a hole in his plan, but could find none.
All right, will do, sir. We'll forward that to engineering.
Make it happen, people, Tigander commanded. Battle Group Leon mobilized quickly. In the space of a few hours, they went from being docked to beginning to enter the wormhole. As was usually the case, the largest ship, the Pembroke, entered first, so as to let other ships hide behind its larger cross-section. The vessel's shields were powered off, and all possible engine power was being utilized to propel it into the Proxima Centauri system. Upon emerging, Tigander got on the vessel's intercom and issued the command to evacuate the front of the Pembroke. Though it did not regularly see use in space combat, ramming was an integral part of ship-to-ship tactics. Those on the Pembroke had practiced ramming drills with regularity, but few had ever experienced the real deal. One never really got used to the horrific screeching of metal and crumpling of compartments. Lombark could not believe his eyes. He dropped his meal, and it clattered against the floor.
No, it cannot be,
he muttered. The Pembroke, the same Pembroke that condemned him to erasure and piracy in the first place. He stared it down, like cornered prey. He opened communications with Mancha and his fleet.
Hello, Lomback,
Mancha said with a toothy grin. His officers rushed to and fro behind him to prepare to engage the UTS fleet. He, however, sat in regal repose in the center of the video feed.
This is what you wanted, isn't it? To take the fight to the humans? Here they are! Not like this! Never like this,
Lomback said.
You promised an exposed flank. Glorious victory. Yep, guess I was wrong,
Mancha responded. He was entirely unburdened, without resignation, without anguish.
It happens. Hey, you would know, Commander.
Lomback glowered.
Hey, chin up. You may redeem yourself yet, Jokshuan.
Mancha unsheathed a single claw and used it to turn the video feed off. He turned to his underlings and grinned. He took a vial of war paint from his pocket and daubed it with ginger applications below his eyes and on his cheeks.
Men, prepare for ramming and boarding action. What's the ETA on the Pembroke? It is en route to collide in 15 minutes,
one of the underlings reported with a bow.
Ah, wonderful!
Mancha grinned. He took a sword from the wall and gave it a well-practiced flourish.
Change course and accelerate into them. Protect the rest of the fleet. Move all munitions and personnel into the back of the ship. Yes, Commander Mancha.
The Pembroke, as well as the Zamuz capital ship, were the epicenter of the flurry of kinetics, energy projectiles, and space torpedoes. Their fronts were completely crumpled. Infantry belonging to either nation donned spacesuits and duked it out in the cold vacuum of the space outside either vessel. But it was no impediment. The fight wasn't even fair. Battle Group Leon outnumbered the Jokshuans and Zamuz combined several times over. Many ships were sent into the frigid atmosphere of Proxima Centauri Sea to their doom. Countless more were obliterated where they stood, becoming part of the planet's resplendent rings. The valor of the three sides was undeniable. Lomback stood his ground, facing off against Battle Group Leon without fleeing as his persona unit advised. He refused to abandon his ship, even as it was cast into the hellishly cold atmosphere of the planet below. Mancha joined the boarding party, assaulting the Pembroke after the ramming action, a sword in one hand and an energy pistol in the other. But Tigander was the undeniable winner. With nowhere to retreat to and no reinforcements to call upon, the extrasolar invaders met an end they had not anticipated. The battle was watched with bated breath on Vulcanus itself. Huddled inside of a shelter, of bars, of domiciles, the denizens of the planet watched as their fate was decided by forces far beyond their control. It didn't feel nice, but they felt proud to be human. Who else could rout at once the formidable Jokshuans and the baleful Zamuz? No one yet, to date.
Proximan Republican Defense Force Command, come in. This is Captain Tigander of the UTS Pembroke.
We read you, Captain. Admiral Wesley here. Report.
Admiral Galway responded from his office on Vulcanus.
We're going to be commandeering all PRDF interceptors.
Copy. For what end, Captain? Do you require fire support?
Negative, Admiral,
Tigander responded. He gazed into the window overlooking the hangar bay and grinned. It was filled with Zamuz braves that had been captured attempting to board the Pembroke.
We could use the help detaining all these damned Xenos.